Imagine you founded a company and you created a life-saving product called baby formula for mothers to use to feed their children when they were unable to breastfeed. Now imagine you then used that same product along with a small sprinkle of propaganda to manipulate mothers who didn't even need your product to now be dependent on it, or else they put their baby's health at risk, all in the name of boosting your profits. An evil, ironic twist of events. You might think this was some medical company that did this, playing with people's health for profits, but no. It was in fact the biggest food company in the world. Now the term food should be used very lightly there because many of the products they supply are about as far from being real food as you can get, but it's somewhat edible nonetheless. That company is Nestlé. You know Nestlé, the company that makes Nesquik, Nescafe, Kit Kats, bottled water. We'll get to bottled water in a bit because that's a whole other story. Surely the Kit Kat company isn't evil? Well, that's where you might be wrong, because the history of Nestlé is much worse than you think, and the present Nestlé might not be much better. The year is 1970, and Nestlé have been selling their baby formula product for a little over 100 years now. A life-saving and life-changing product to mothers and babies all over the world who, for whatever reason it may be, can't produce or consume regular breast milk. But at the end of the day, Nestlé is a business, and the total number of mothers who can't breastfeed, aka your customer base, is incredibly small compared to the global population, standing at roughly 1 to maybe 5%. So you need a way to access the other 95% in any way that you can, which is going to be hard because breast milk has been developed by nature over the course of billions of years to be everything that a baby needs during its development, and baby milk formula is only a little over 100 years, so you're at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to experience and product development. So you have two options: keep developing over the next billion years, not obviously the best choice, or option 2, use propaganda, the much quicker option. But if you're going to use propaganda, you're going to need to pull out a few other tricks as well. Firstly, you're going to need to use a reliable and reputable source to help convince people. This is a baby's health we're talking about after all, so who better to advise on health than doctors? So you take a leaf out of the cigarette and tobacco company's playbook, and you begin to hire and pay doctors to recommend your products to mothers coming in for their checkups. But doing this in the US and Europe is sometimes difficult. With that whole education thing they've got, they tend to be harder to convince because they know breast milk is the better option. So you then move on to step 2 of your plan. Target those in the poor and less educated areas of the world, such as Africa. So Nestlé begins its advertising campaign in the poorest regions of Africa and Asia, going so far as to skip the part of hiring doctors and instead hiring salesmen and women to dress up as doctors and provide their product to everyone. But this is where the real trick comes in, because you see, initially, Nestlé wasn't even selling their product, they were just giving it out for free. So in an effort to make more money, Nestlé just gave away their product for nothing? That doesn't make any sense. Until you realise that the amount they were giving out in their samples was just enough to last roughly the same amount of time it takes for the mother to stop developing breast milk on their own, turning mothers who didn't even need their product initially into dependent customers, now relying on the baby formula mix to keep their child alive. What makes a customer more reliant on you than providing them with a potentially life or death situation for someone they love? Now, the lack of education didn't just stop at breast milk. Many, if not nearly all the women who were using the baby milk formula, including the ones now dependent on it entirely, likely didn't have access to clean water, or know that they would need to boil the water first to make sure that it was clean. So not only were they being provided a far inferior product made up of just cow's milk, sugar and vegetable oils, they were also using dirty and contaminated water, potentially damaging the baby's health even further. And with the mothers being targeted in some of the poorest regions in the world, if they were unable to regularly afford the mixture and tried to extend the amount of baby formula they had by watering it down, they also ran the risk of water intoxication to their children, potentially leading to seizures, brain damage and possibly even the death of their child. There was, of course, plausible deniability that Nestlé had to all of this. After all, if you wanted to, you could just pretend that the salespeople were lying to you claiming to be doctors. And if the mothers didn't use clean water or boil the dirty water to try and clean it, and ended up using the wrong ratios of formula to water, potentially harming their child, you could just say that you wrote the instructions on their packaging, which they did. However, this does ignore the fact that, obviously with them targeting the poorer regions of the world, many of these customers were obviously likely to be illiterate. But they still wrote it, so they were covered. The main difference and issue with using baby formula over breast milk is that formula doesn't provide many of the nutrients required for a baby's natural and healthy development. and doesn't help build an immune system from the mother as strong as breastfeeding does, meaning the regular consumption of the dirty water that the mothers may have gotten used to over the years and the regular diseases they'll be surrounded by in these poorer regions won't be passed to the baby to help its development. Nestlé executives would even be brought before the US Senate regarding why so many babies were dying and getting sick whilst consuming their formula, and the use of that formula in areas with dirty and unclean water, in which they would admit that their products shouldn't be used by people in these areas. But the plausible deniability strikes again. They can't help if the people who buy their products don't have access to clean water. You can't force people to consume your product in a specific area, so it was hard to actually pin anything on them. The public backlash in the US and Europe would start, however, with many groups boycotting and protesting the baby formula and the tactics Nestlé were using abroad, resulting in stricter laws being brought in by the US and Europe regarding baby formula, stopping them from tricking people into using their formula. And the World Health Organization set new regulations, meaning they could no longer compare breast milk to any of its formula alternatives. This, of course, doesn't stop Nestlé from continuing to sell their products and promote it in other ways, or stop them from sponsoring hospitals or medical facilities and providing their products to them, provided they continue to do it in the countries where they're likely to get away with it. Now, obviously, many companies that have existed for a long period of time will have points in that history where they will have done dark or bad things. And the bigger the company has grown and longer they've gone on for, the more likely it seems to be that that's the case. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the company continues to do bad things today, does it? Well, Save the Children released a report in 2018 detailing how Nestlé still continues to bribe medical professionals and continue to give out their free samples. But along with their apparently continued baby formula campaign after all these years, they also branched out into another market to attempt to provide everyone with clean water and plenty of plastic bottles that can be conveniently left anywhere you want to litter. And with this branching out into a new market came more scandals and controversy that the company is all too familiar with at this point. In pretty much all modern and first world countries, unless you live in Flint, Michigan, the tap water is generally pretty safe to drink and easy to get hold of considering it's incredibly cheap. However, if you were to put that same water in a small plastic bottle, you now have the chance to charge a near extortionate markup on that same water. For example, Nestlé can purchase a tank load of water for around $10. Put that water in a plastic bottle, and all of a sudden Nestlé charges up to $50,000 for the exact same amount of water, an increase of almost 500,000%. Speaking of putting your own tap water in a bottle and selling it, Nestlé have been caught doing exactly that, multiple times. The ability to charge you for things that you should already have seems to be a regular business practice for Nestlé. As in Pakistan, there were reports of Nestlé diverting clean water from local villagers, leaving them with only dirty water, then selling them the exact same clean water that they'd initially diverted from them, forcing them to drink the dirty water they'd been left with because they couldn't afford the bottles. Now, water is obviously pretty important for humans and life in general. After all, you die after just a couple of days without it. However, the former CEO of Nestlé has stated that he doesn't believe access to safe, clean tap water is a human right, and saying that he thought declaring it a human right was a extreme solution. And just to top all of this off, Nestlé has been known to get their water in America from states that operate with what's called absolute capture laws, wherein Nestlé is able to suck out all the water in the ground, provided they own the land. This has led to deforestation in many areas due to lack of water for any plants and wildlife in the region. Now, so far that's deforestation, misinformation, propaganda, and endangerment of babies' lives. Maybe the Kit Kat company isn't so good after all. But while we're at it, we might as well add one more to that list with child slavery. Yeah, it doesn't get any better. Yes, one way to increase your business profits is to obviously increase sales, but you can also cut down on expenses. Now, hiring children is much cheaper than hiring adults, and slaves are even cheaper than that. Many of the cocoa plants that are harvested to make the Kit Kats and other chocolates you see in stores is harvested from Africa. Yeah, Nestlé just seems to really hate Africa, don't they? And many of the farms and plantations that Nestlé and other chocolate companies purchase their cocoa from can often use the help of child slaves and other forcibly unpaid workers to harvest their products, which these chocolate companies buy from because they offer the cheapest cocoa. Now, similar to the baby formula instructions, there is some plausible deniability here as well. Yes, Nestlé has reportedly bought from farms that use child slaves. However, Nestlé doesn't necessarily know that, and they aren't the ones running the farm, so how would they know the terms for their employees? Nestlé just buy the product, funding the farm and giving them no reason to actually pay their workers because they still make money, and not paying your employees means you can make more money. Now, Nestlé, along with Cadbury and Mars, who have all been in trouble for reportedly sourcing their cocoa and other products from farms that have forced labourers, all banded together as the Chocolate Manufacturers Association, which later changed its name to the World Cocoa Foundation to sound a bit more friendly, and promised that by 2005 their chocolates would be slave-free. It's also worth noting that they missed this target, and every other target date that they added since. Perhaps the Kit Kat company isn't so good after all. But speaking of Kit Kats, Nestlé brought all of the cocoa that they're fairly certain wasn't sourced by unpaid children and used it to make their Kit Kats. Also, they can put the Fair Trade logo on it that you may have seen before. This doesn't extend to all of their products, but it does to Kit Kats, so at least you can enjoy them guilt-free while you take a break.